Now, it being Champions League week, of course, players have been doing press conference, including Rodri, who talked about the possibility of players striking if the number of fixtures continue to increase. A lot of other players have been asked about the same subject as well, and everyone seems on the same page that it's almost enough is enough. For more on this, let's welcome in a man who's never on strike. Gab Marcotti joins us. Gab, obviously, this is something that we've talked about over recent months, recent years, that the fixtures are taking its toll on the quality and the injuries that we're seeing with players. How much of this talk could actually prove to be an action when it comes to a strike?
So, I mean, I think it's possible. They have agency, right? They can control this. But there's more to it than meets the eye. First and foremost, Rodri plays a ton of games. Dani Carvajal plays a lot of games. You know, these guys who've come out and spoken. But in terms of the ecosystem, most top-flight professional footballers don't play too many games. In fact, they would probably like to play more games, essentially, so that they can go further in competitions and, let's face it, make more money. I think what's interesting here is behind it, and the Players Union, the PFA here in England, FIFPro, the Italian Players Union, the Spanish Players Union, they've all come out and they've said, yes, they play too many games, and it's the fault of UEFA and FIFA. Obviously, FIFA with the Club World Cup, UEFA with the expanded Champions League. Nobody wants to talk about cutting down league football from 20 teams, the way it is in Spain, England, and Italy, down to 18. So I think there's political aspects to it. There are solutions. People have suggested even, you know, we limit air traffic controllers, we limit truck drivers, the number of hours that they can go without a rest. Is this an option for footballers? People have talked about this, but, you know, first and foremost, the argument is, and it goes back to the same thing with all these guys, if you play for Real Madrid or Manchester City, these top clubs, they profit from all these extra games that you play. So you need to have an uncomfortable conversation with your boss as well.
Gab brings up a good point there, Ali. Say you don't play in the Champions League. Yeah. Say you're not an international. Say you're just a player playing week in, week out.
Right.
How much empathy do you have for these players? And how much do you feel like, well, you signed up for it, you know what you're going to get?
But I don't think it's the fault of the top-tier player that he's an outstanding player. And so, therefore, we must then, instead of reward you for being an outstanding player, we should then punish you by giving you more games so that then your level of performance drops. And I think what the players are saying is, listen, it's not that we don't want to play these games as such. It's the fact that in playing these games, one, fitness level are not going to be there. Two, in terms of injuries, we're exposing ourselves. And when we're exposing ourselves to injuries, now that affects my livelihood. Right. It affects what I do. It affects what I do in the now and what I do in the future. The issue with this is, and this is just a sort of a bigger picture, how do you bring in players' associations from all sorts of different parts to actually come into a negotiating table having the same interest, and whether that interest is actually indeed the players? Let's assume that you're able to do that. Right now, I think the players in the public, in the court of public opinion, they have, I think, leverage. Mm-hmm. They have sympathy, right? But once the strike actually happens, and I can tell you this from experience, having lived in this country in which I've seen baseball strikes and I've seen basketball strikes and so on and so forth, and it becomes millionaires arguing with billionaires, then it's difficult. Then that fan is saying to himself, okay, I understood your point initially, but now you're taking from me. You're taking from the fan and the fan experience. And you're taking from the thing that I grew up watching and loving and caring for you as a player, but now you're not there anymore. And so millionaires against billionaires, it's a conversation that gets very uncomfortable and nobody benefits from it.
What do you think of all this, Shaq?
I understand the discussion. I understand why players are as upset as they are. I think there has to be a limit to this. I don't think there'll be a strike. I think there'll be a lot of discussion around it, a lot of people suggesting as much. But at the same time, I feel that we've gone past a reasonable threshold for the number of games that players play. And yes, I also get the point that players are paid very handsomely to play those football games. But then at some point, you have to hit the ceiling. At some point, my wages can only rise as quickly as the TV contracts rise. You cannot add, and you know, to Gab's point, while yes, you have a 20-league format, but now we have an expanded Champions League. We have a Club World Cup. There, ridiculously, a few years ago, there was a discussion around having the World Cup around every 2 years. An increased World Cup format. Where does it stop in terms of this is the number of games, this is how much clubs can afford to pay the top earners, and that's just where it settles, as opposed to constantly trying to discover ways to generate more revenue so that you can keep up with player demand. There has to be an adult, there has to be a level head in all this discussion.
To your point, Shaq, the product suffers. The product gets devalued and gets diluted. The more games you play, the more the product suffers. And that, in the end, I think affects not only the players, the clubs, it affects all of us. And those that consume it. I suppose we'll keep watching, but do you want to see the very best of these players or what's left of these players? I think the answer is clear.
Quickly, Gab.
No, I think I take on board what Ali says. I don't think that the market reflects what he's saying, because people don't really care about the quality. They just want to see the big names, at least in terms of viewership numbers. But you're right. You hit the nail on the head earlier, Shaka did. Wages have grown much quicker than revenue. And so if you want revenue to keep up with that, you play these extra games, whether they're official competitions, whether they're endless preseason tours. FIFA, the Players Union, has been going on about this for a long time. And the problem is there is no one-size-fits-all solution, because what works for Manchester City may not work for Valladolid.